Hey friends, it's Carl here with another Calm Survival, and today we're talking first aid kits. This is going to be the start of a series, and we're going to discuss some of the different uses, some of the different ways to set up a first aid kit. Now, it's really important for me to start by saying that you should take a first aid course. First aid courses are really important, and you can learn things in a proper course that you just can't learn based on videos. The other thing that is really important to know is you may or may not have certain responsibilities based on where you live. So in general, in most places, as long as you're doing what is considered a reasonable thing by a reasonable person, you're not going to come into any legal trouble. But I'm not a lawyer, so it's important to know that for sure where you live. The reality is, on this end of 2020, a lot more of us are a lot more on our own than we ever have been before. And so maybe those legal requirements and worrying about getting sued might not be your biggest priority. And to me, that's totally justifiable. I would rather do something that saved someone's life, and if there's consequences after that, I'll deal with that then. But what we've got here is a bunch of different first aid kits. So while I move them out of the way, what do we mean when we say first aid? Well, it pretty much means the first things you do to either help somebody with an injury, make their injury, better, try to treat it, or at least keep it from getting worse. Now, the problem with that, as a definition, is that that would presume that first aid kits would be limited to that sort of equipment, but they're really not. So let's just take this little pre-manufactured one as a starting point. Okay, it's basically marketed as a little kind of a day walking, kind of throw in your bag sort of kit. It's pretty simple, but what do we have? So we've got some Band-Aids. Well, by the definition, that is something that you could use first up to, prevent an injury from getting worse or treat an injury. Maybe something like a blister or some small cut. We have some things like some saline to wash out a wound, some antiseptic wipes. We've got our CPR kit, which, I'll be honest, it's important that you keep masks and shields around. They're important, but without an AED, CPR is not super effective. That's something that doesn't get talked very openly in a lot of first aid courses, because the reality is that you can be very helpful, but it does set people up to have a bit of a false expectation of just how helpful they can be. The downside is that you can also discourage people from starting CPR if they know how low of a chance it has. The reality is any chance is better than no chance, so having that CPR kit and having that skill is always worthwhile, but it's a small percentage point of view. The big thing in this kit is this snakebite bandage because, well, Australia. And then we've got some little, gauze and a triangle bandage. But the reality is that this is probably the key component of this first aid kit. This is going to be the most likely used to actually save a life. The rest of this stuff can almost be made up on the fly. You can improvise a lot of things. This is hard to improvise. So that's going to give you a bit of an idea of where we're starting from with how we're going to look at first aid kits. Now, to break this down, the way I view every first aid kit is it's going to have a core component. In my first aid kits here, the biggest component, the thing that takes up the most space, and the thing that defines everything around the first aid kit is almost certainly going to be a snakebite bandage because that's just the environment I live in. Now, if I happen to live in the United States, that snakebite bandage isn't going to do me any good. Okay? Different species of snakes, different genuses of snakes have different venoms. Here, that's what we use. But also in most of the US, I'm not going to be as worried about snakebite. You're probably seeing on YouTube a lot of first aid kits posted that are gunshot trauma kits. The sad reality is that something that people have to deal with. And so in that case, a tourniquet and chest seals would certainly be a higher priority than a compression bandage. It's not a problem I have, so I can't really speak directly to it. But that's what I mean. Those are going to be the biggest things. Now, that was representative of sort of the kind of middle and commercial kit. This is my small pocket kit. It basically just has, a few bandages, some blister pads, and a bit of gauze. This kit, even though it's technically a first aid kit, is not intended to be on its own. It's definitely designed to be supplemented with another kit. This is what I can get in my hands, and I keep it when I'm carrying it in a location where I can get to it immediately. And that comes from doing sport med, where you need your gloves right away, because when that injury happens, you want to be gloved up and ready to go. So I can have my gloves on, I can be putting some gauze into a wound really quickly, while somebody else hopefully is able to get the larger first aid kit out and they can start getting more things prepped. There are some thru hikers and some folks that do, certain kinds of trekking where, they would feel comfortable with that being their first aid kit. But that's not what I use all on its own. So keeping in mind that we need to know what the core component of our first aid kit is going to be, what the scope of our first aid kit is going to be, and as we go through some more details, you'll see what I mean when I say, like, how big can our first aid kit reasonably get? And the practical limits of the duration that we can handle and how many people is it going to serve. If this is the smallest first aid kit, the biggest first aid kit I've ever used, well, it was mounted in the back of a King Cab F350. So the range is how long is a piece of string. We obviously can't carry a fully stocked medical response unit, fully stocked ambulance, but we also probably should carry more than 2 Band-Aids. So that's my starting point. There's going to be a whole bunch more as we go through some different components and we go through some different styles of first aid kit. Catch you on the next one.